Hello and welcome to College and Beyond Real Talk with Amour. If you have not already guessed, I am your host, Amour Carthy. Today's episode is sponsored by Education Innovations, where we help guide families through education decisions from college and graduate admissions to life beyond. And the purpose of this podcast is to help people understand what college is like and to learn more about careers. Today's guest is Janeé Bolden. The topic she is going to be discussing is dream job, real life, journalism's twists and turns. So without further ado, let's bring on Janeé Bolden. Hey, how are you today?
Great.
Thank you for coming on to the show. Janeé, I am so excited about you sharing about your journey and your career and college and all of those kind of things.
Mhm.
Why don't we start out by, telling the people, like, I think that people think they know what journalism is, but really they don't know. So tell us what journalism is and what people think it is, but it's not.
Okay, that's actually kind of a tough question for me. I know we've talked about a little bit about what I studied in college. So I actually didn't go to journalism school, and I define myself as a writer first. But I'm a writer and a journalist. I am. So journalism does have some set expectations. With journalism, there are a lot of ethics involved. There's also, anytime you're sharing a story, you have to try to get as many sources as possible to make sure you're factually correct. Because if you are just reporting from one side, then it's biased. So anytime you're writing about a subject, you want to make sure that you have multiple perspectives. Basically, the best way to define it, I had to write something down, but it's the practice of gathering, verifying, and presenting information about events, issues, and people so the public can understand the world around them and make informed decisions. So it has some pillars. As I was saying, truth and accuracy is really important. You have to fact check. You weigh the sources, context is provided. So anytime you're seeing something in print, it's not necessarily journalism. You have to look at it and say, have these facts been checked? Have the sources been verified? Is this person actually a subject matter leader or expert? Journalism also should have independence, reporting that serves the public interest, not personal or institutional agendas, accountability, where power is questioned, and clarity. So complex realities are translated into accessible stories. So think of it as a public record written in real time. You're documenting history, but you also are asking the tough questions. So journalism is not like the fluff, of only the soft questions. You have to ask if someone has been, if someone's been charged with a crime, you need to ask those questions. If the case is ongoing, might decline comments. But if, it kind of can help you just have the best sense of the truth and what's going on. So sometimes if there's an open case, by saying this is still an open matter, then you understand the story's not finished yet. It's still being written. But if you hear the
Mm.
case has been dismissed, that has a different weight to the story. So that's just an example that I'm giving. Just really important things to consider as a journalist that writers don't necessarily have to consider. But some writers would still argue that there's ethics and morality that are involved in a really complicated time. And I think especially we're seeing a lot more paid media. You see a lot more influencers who are reporting, and
Mhm.
that's very different from a journalist. A journalist is always going to make sure that they have fact checks, that the sources are verifiable, and just really that they are checking off all the boxes and making sure that what they're giving you is as truthful as possible.
Thank you for sharing that and, clarifying it for the audience and myself. So you also said that you consider yourself a writer. Can you talk about that more to me about, you being a writer? And why don't you tell, or explain to us, when did you first fall in love with writing? Or at what point did you say, I want to be a writer? Or, tell us more about that.
I'm one of those lucky people who has always known what their calling is. So when I was
Hmm.
little, I used to always love being read to. Books were my favorite thing. And I was constantly asking, the joke in the family is with my grandmother, I would always be like, read me Bible, because that was what she would read is the children's Bible stories. And I love
Hmm.
to read those stories. And I was the only child for a long time. So when I was about 4, I would be asking my mom to read to me. And anybody who has young kids or toddlers or has been through that process of being a mother, you understand like that's an age where the child needs a lot of activity. They need things to do. And if they're not things that they can do with solo play, they're going to drive their parent crazy. My mom taught me how to read when I was like 3 or 4 years old because I was so persistent with the reading thing, and throughout my childhood, I could always be bribed with books. So, if you're
Mm,
good, you get an extra book, if you don't cry when you get your shots, I'll get you a book, and I would negotiate 2 books or
mm,
3 books, 4 books, that kinda thing.
mm,
So, I've always loved, literature and reading and writing and different kinds of books. So, of course, I mentioned the Bible.
mhm,
As a kid, we all love those Bible stories.
mhm,
And, but I liked all kinds of books. I liked the books with words. I wasn't big on just pictures. I needed the words too. So I would just say that it came from that. And then as I grew older, people tried to discourage me. And I think that that's really common for kids who have creative passions. A lot of times they will find that other people tried to say that should be your plan B, or
mhm,
like have a backup plan because that job doesn't get a lot of money. They don't make a lot of money. So I
mhm,
was constantly being told, be ready, you're going to be a starving artist. And it was
mhm,
like such a scary thing. So when I was 18 and I arrived at college, I went to NYU and I knew I wanted to go to a liberal arts school, but I wasn't quite sure what I was going to study
mhm,
because I had been told that writing was like not a realistic career path.
mhm,
So I tried different things. I did internship in public relations. I worked in the computer lab. I did all
mm,
of the things. And
mhm,
in my senior year, which is where I had a lot of free time for electives, I chose to take a creative writing class. And it was split into 2 semesters. And the first semester was, or maybe it was a 1 semester writing class, but the first half of the semester was poetry and the second half was fiction writing. And I was really a poet. That's really why people told me I was gonna be poor because they were like, "Poets, you're gonna be starving." So the first half was the poetry part.
mhm,
I really excelled and my classmates were like, "Oh my god, you're gonna write Hallmark cards and you're gonna write jingles," and like, "These
mm.
poems are so good because I could do rhyming poems and non-rhyming poems and all the different formats, the haiku and you know,
Oh,
the sonnets and all of that. Just because I'm a big word nerd. And,
mhm,
then the second part, the fiction was more of a challenge, but I found that I liked writing short stories. And so that's kinda when I decided, I love this so much, like, there's really nothing else that I love as much as this. So then that was the first semester of my senior year. So my second semester of my senior year, I took another creative writing course, and my professor also taught at the grad school program at NYU.
mhm,
So that's what led me to, okay, he's a professional writer and he teaches at NYU as well. So maybe
mhm,
this is something I can do. So I decided to go to grad school for creative writing. And then that's
mhm,
kind of how things started to take shape. I was starting to meet other writers. I was in these writing workshops. So I was really learning like how they work, how it works when you're in a writer's room and you get feedback from other people, and how to
mm,
learn when you're getting constructive criticism and when you really are like, that person didn't actually read it. They're just nitpicking at something that, you know what I mean?
yeah,
It kind of helped me develop a thicker skin, but also a good sense of judgment in terms of like, I'm being told this to make it, improve my skills and make me better. And
mhm,
this is just someone who doesn't understand what I do. You don't get me as an artist, and that's okay.
mhm.
Because a lot of times I wouldn't get everyone in the class either. It just, you have your favorites and so on and so on. So I ended up getting an MFA in creative writing from NYU, and then from there,
Can I ask you a question?
yes,
So
stop me
in
anytime because I will just rebel.
undergrad in undergrad, you said that you got the creative writing courses in your senior year. So what were you majoring in, prior, to taking those creative writing courses? And then you said you knew you wanted to go to liberal arts school. Where did you grow up?
Mhm.
Can you talk about that?
Sure. So I grew up in Iowa City, Iowa. I lived there from when I was 12 years old, 7th grade through 12th grade. And I still was probably writing even that young junior high. Language arts classes were always, my favorite. All of those reading subjects were always my favorite. And Iowa actually has one of the best writing programs in the country, but
Mhm.
you could not have paid me at that time to stay. Yeah.
Mhm.
I needed to get out. And, I applied to mostly East Coast colleges. I visited a lot of East Coast colleges. I visited Amherst College, I visited Wesleyan, I visited Columbia, NYU,
Mhm.
Harvard, and I had applied to, Bryn Mawr, Brown, Harvard. Well, Harvard, I only completed the first part of the application
Mhm.
because when I went to go visit, I had an unpleasant incident. And so I was like, they charge a lot for their application fee. And after the
Mhm.
unpleasant incident, I was like, they're not going to get any more money out of me. Ironically, I still got a letter from their African American Students Association welcoming me into the class
Oh.
of 2000. So I was like, I guess I got in even on just one half of the application. But yeah, so those were some of the schools I applied to. Did really a lot of my decision was based on financial aid. Some of it was based on vibes,
Mhm.
strictly vibes. I went to Columbia, didn't like the vibes, so didn't
Mhm.
apply. I
Mhm.
mean, for as far as college visits. But when I was at
Right.
NYU, I
Mhm.
loved it. I was like, okay, I see this. There's no real campus. I mean,
Mhm.
there is a bit of a campus, but it's a little bit just all over the place downtown outside of the
Mhm.
Washington Square Village campus. And they
Mm.
gave me the best financial aid package. I had a little scholarship. I
Mhm.
also was a National Achievement Scholar for any of your
Mm.
students who
Mhm.
get that. It's a great program. They
Mhm.
don't make the announcement until after a lot of college acceptances come in. So I got college offers that for places I had not applied to once those national achievement things came in. Um,
Mhm.
and that made it tougher because it was like, okay, I
Mhm.
decided to go to NYU. And then Howard was
Mhm.
like, you want a full ride? And I was like, yeah, I want a full ride to Howard. But I was concerned of going from an all-white environment in
Mhm.
Iowa to an all-black environment of a HBCU. NYU
Mhm.
offered, semester exchanges, so I was like, "Oh, I could always
Oh,
do a semester at
yeah.
Spelman."
Mhm.
So, that's kind of how I chose NYU, and I think I made a great decision. Initially, it was very intimidating just because it's a really large school. I think people, when they're trying to decide which schools to go to, really do your research because
Mhm.
NYU is actually like a collection of 9 different colleges. So you have your liberal arts school, you have the Tisch
Mhm.
School of the Arts, you have Stern School of
Mhm.
Business, you have Gallatin School, you have Steinhardt. I know I'm probably leaving a couple out, but the good thing about NYU is you can take classes at the other colleges.
Mhm.
I really enjoyed the Gallatin classes that I took. So when I'm talking about the classes, so the first year, a lot of it was prerequisite stuff. So you're having to take like British literature, and then you'll
Mm.
take American literature and then to be an so I was an English major and I did that
Okay.
because I had, my parents' friends and a lot of them were attorneys and they were like, well, you could do anything with an English degree. Like in that, and that's really what
Mm. Mhm.
is accurate. A lot of times you will find, even now when you look for jobs, people are looking for a degree in communications or English because if you can write well, you can do multiple things well. And
Mhm.
many of those careers, I mentioned my public relations internship, PR requires good writers, journalism requires good writers. Even if you decide you don't want to be in front of the camera, having the writing skills will take you far because you can work in script supervisor, or you can do a news writer where you're the person that's writing the news that the anchor
Mhm.
is reading. And so I just looked at it like, I don't know what I want to do right this moment.
Mhm.
And I will start with this broad English foundation.
Mhm.
And then I have a minor. I minored in Africana studies. And the reason that I did that was when I was choosing classes, I chose an African American psychology course my first semester of my freshman year. I got to that course, and the professor said, if you're a freshman, get out of my class. He said, transfer out of the class. You need the
Mm.
foundation there was like a few courses he wanted you to take intro psych. He wanted you to
Mm.
take another course. So I went to my guidance counselor, and she said, "Okay, you're interested in African American studies. We have
Mhm.
an Africana Studies department. Um, let's put you in either intro to." She was like, "If you wanted, say you wanted to minor, you would either do intro to Pan African Studies, or you would do I believe it's kind of like an intro to urban studies. I can't remember if that was the exact name because NYU
Mhm.
definitely gets creative. But at the time, we had a brilliant professor at NYU named Trisha Rose. If
Mhm.
anyone has
Mhm.
studied African American studies, she is one of the foremost experts in the subject. So I actually didn't, her class was full. I took the intro to Pan African studies and my parents are academics. My mother
Mhm.
is a sociologist. She has her PhD in
Mhm.
sociology. She has taught at FAMU. She has taught at University of Iowa. She's taught a few different places.
Mhm.
My father, he is a dentist. He's now retired, but he
Mhm.
had taught Harvard, Tufts, and dental programs. And then part of the reason we were in Iowa for my those 6 years, he was
Mhm.
running the dental program at the University of Iowa.
Mhm.
So I had really strong, well-educated parents who had kept me very well versed in just Black thought, Black studies, Black history.
Mhm.
In my free time, in what I wasn't taught in high school or junior high,
Mhm.
I had books that my parents, would get me. And so I knew a lot already, but there were certain things I
Mhm.
didn't know. Like I didn't have the names for certain things. So I
Mhm.
was introduced to concepts like the new Negro. I was introduced to concepts like Pan Africanism. I didn't understand. I'd never heard diaspora before I got
Yes. Mhm.
to college. So this was great and so first it was the Pan Africanism class, and I learned about maroons and maroon
Yes.
colonies in all over Brazil, Jamaica.
Mhm.
I remember writing papers on that, and,
Mhm.
I think I took that class my 1st semester, and then 2nd semester, I believe I took a Swahili course and
Mm.
excelled, but I'm really good with languages, so Swahili, and then once I took the 2 classes, my advisor was like, "You know, if you take 4 classes in Africana Studies, you've fulfilled your minor."
Oh,
So I
wow.
went ahead and I got into my sophomore year, I got into Trisha Rose's Intro to Urban Studies
Mhm.
course. So I took that as well, and it was a great way of connecting. I remember interviewing my grandmother when we were talking about the Great Migration, which,
Oh,
is
nice.
something that happened
Mhm.
here, and my
Mhm.
family being from Alabama and the South, and I had a chance to learn about when she had moved to Harlem in her 20s, which was something I had gone literally until I got to college before I knew that. I had never known that my grandmother had lived anywhere but Birmingham, Alabama or Montgomery, Alabama. So this was like fascinating to me to get to study literally with my ancestor.
That is fascinating. I love how you're talking about the twists and turns and then how your love of writing developed. So you went on to, from undergrad to graduate school, and it seems like you were open and like letting things go naturally and develop. So you figured out you can, do a career. Were you writing for any papers or, I heard you say like you did workshops. Like, tell me, like, how
Yeah.
were you like testing out? Can I make some money from this? Like, how were you developing things besides workshops?
Wasn't so, like, in high school, like, I didn't do newspaper. They did have a literary magazine at my high school, so I did
Hmm.
work on that, but
Hmm.
we were really underfunded for that literary paper, so I don't even
Hmm.
remember if we put a
Hmm.
publication out.
Hmm.
Once I got to grad school, there were some second year grad students who were
Hmm.
working on Koresh Ali Lansana is a poet from Chicago.
Hmm.
And he approached me and he said, I'm working on this anthology. He was working on an anthology with two other poets, Tony Medina and Samia Bashir, and they needed editorial assistance. And so he talked me into it. And it wasn't a paid gig. I
Hmm.
did get my first publication or piece piece of poetry published. Prior to that, I had gotten a piece in what they'll call vanity publishing, where you
Mhm.
can like send your thing off. It wasn't really vanity because I didn't pay to be included, but like I would just say for any writers,
Mhm.
be very cautious before spending money to get your work published because
Mhm.
that is a whole industry in its own. So I would just say be careful there. The first magazine story that I published, I was probably around 24. No, maybe
Mm.
22. My
Mhm.
cousin got married in 2004 and she did a cruise. She did like a destination wedding.
Mhm.
And I was networking around New York City and I had met a woman who was the editor in chief of Travel Savvy magazine. So I pitched
Mhm.
her this story, like, it was like the first sailing for this Royal Caribbean ship that my cousin had her wedding on. So I wrote a piece for that and it wasn't a lot of money. I might have got like $60 for that.
Mm. But
And
you still
then what
got
I got for
published.
yeah, I got published. And then what I
Mhm.
got for the other piece that I was or for being an editorial assistant, I think they might have gave me like $50. Like
Mm.
it wasn't a lot, but I
Mhm.
did get published, it's in a book. I have the book. It's a very good book.
Mhm.
It has some of the best writing, Black writing in probably early 2000s. And it's a mixture of like pop culture writing and historical writing. And there's poems and short stories in that publication. Where the bridge that led me to where I am now with the
Mhm.
20-year career is I was living in New York City and my mom was like, "You are not using your craft. You are content." I was working at NYU. I was making really good money for a 20 something.
Mhm.
And she was like, "Don't you want to write your book?" And I'm like, "Okay, you have a good point, but I can't afford to like stop working." And she
Mhm.
was like, "Well, come to Florida, live with me, and then you won't have the distractions." Because I will say one thing about me. People think I'm an extrovert. I'm not. I'm kind of in the middle. I'm like an
Mhm.
ambivert. But I did know so many people from going to school in New York. I was very social in my 20s. And so I was like
Mhm.
out all the time.
Mhm.
And I did have a job that didn't have a lot of demands, and that's
Mhm.
what I would recommend to anyone who's a creative is, like, find something that doesn't take up all your brain power.
Mhm.
But the problem was I wasn't using that free time, to work on my craft. So
Mm.
I developed a plan. I kinda plotted out maybe 3 or 4 months, maybe even 6 months in advance that I was gonna
Mhm.
leave New York in
Mhm.
August of 2005. So I
Mm.
left, at the time initially, the plan had been to go stay with my mother in Florida, but I had reconnected with this guy that I had met at FAMU homecoming and we had clicked. We had been doing long distance for a while, so I ended up kind of going back and forth between Atlanta and New York. Now, before I left New York, I had started writing for free for my friend's website called Dope Mag. And so I was
Mm.
interviewing a lot of artists. I've always been a big music lover, and so I think that's the other key I think to really finding the right job for you is just what's a passion that you have, like what's something you would do for free. And so it just happened to work out that I had written a few articles that had caught the attention of a former classmate who was working for an outlet called SOHH. And he needed a news writer, a freelance news writer. And it was perfect because it was like, here I am. Like, it was great. I didn't have a car. So having
Mhm.
a remote job and it
Mhm.
was like a perfect first job in journalism, and,
Mhm.
it was a lot of it was instinctive. Like I said, I didn't go to journalism school. It was really just about asking the right questions and, like, anyone I would most of your students likely have heard, like, who, what, where, when, and why, and, like, those are,
Mhm.
like, really keys when you're telling a story. Like, who are we talking about? What happened with them? Why did it go that way? How did it happen? And so once I, had kind of mastered this, and just I think also being a woman in a predominantly male space, my editors used to always be like, "Oh my god, these guys like they love her." I also
No, but
have like
you have a way of talking to people where it's not harsh and it's nice. So even when I met you, like, you're gorgeous, you're sweet, you don't just, you're not like rough with people, you know?
that's funny. It probably depends because there's probably a whole
Yeah.
bunch of other people who can tell you that like I'm too blunt or I'm too this or I just say what I I think out loud
I've seen
or,
that. Well,
whatever.
I've seen you do that too when somebody's doing something foolish, and I just observe. I'm sorry for cutting you off. Go ahead.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, so no, I was really good with the rappers, really, really good with the producers. Because the producers, I don't want to take anything away from the rappers, but the
Mhm,
producers are really like the brains. You know what I'm saying? Like they are the deep thinkers. And so we would always just like, we connect, we get each other, and then we can nerd out about the records and the samples and the
mhm,
process and the creative process. Sometimes I would have these interviews that would be like 2 hours long, and then I would have
mhm,
to transcribe them, which is like
mm,
really, it's a lot of heavy lifting. Now we live in an era, your students
mhm,
are so lucky because you can just take a recording and send it to AI, and then AI can transcribe it. But a lot
mhm.
of times when we're talking about hip hop culture or music, you still need to have that human to read it through because they're not going to understand some of the terminology. They don't know what
Right,
cap is. Come on.
right. Or bando.
So exactly. They don't know what band. I remember one time I was transcribing something and it was an interview with Crime Mob.
Mhm.
And even I with Crime Mob, I remember calling my friend Maurice Garland, who's another great hip hop writer from
Mm.
Atlanta. And I was like, what did they say? And he was like, oh, they said Miller Grove Elementary School. I was like, I never would have got that. Like, thank God. Cause it was like the accent was just out of control.
Mm-mm. So, so you said you connected with the producers on a nerd and you nerded out. So, and you loved music. So, were you listening to your parents, old school music? And is that why you connected also? And then did you feel like the Africana minor helped you too with a deep or depth of understanding about the African diaspora experience along with your just growing up in different parts of the country?
Okay. Which question first?
Whatever you want, because I know I want all the questions.
Okay, so my parents, yes. But the thing is, my parents are really R&B people. They didn't necessarily understand the hip
Mhm,
hop stuff as much. But like, I would say my dad and I were really big into music together. Like, he always had like an office, and he would have like this great sound system, and we would listen. And we listened to a lot of Michael Jackson and Prince, and Prince was my favorite.
mhm.
But we would also listen to like Phil Collins and Genesis and NXS and like that 80s music.
Yes.
My mother was more like, the music you put on when you're cooking and cleaning and stuff like that. And it was like a lot of Luther Vandross, a lot of like Anita Baker. She's a big Whitney Houston fan. So I definitely would credit them for like my love of pop culture. I also have my Uncle Clinton,
Mhm,
who like at my on like a soul level, I always feel like he has seen me. He could always see me. And when I was a
mhm.
little kid, and people talk to little kids crazy, like they don't think they have an understanding. And he and I would talk about Prince, and he'd be like, we would be talking about like Apollonia and like
What?
Vanity and stuff. You know what I'm saying? And like he saw me, you know what I'm
Mhm,
saying? And so like that's where that part came from. Now the Africana studies, I would say it's so funny because I have a friend, actually a guy I dated in college, Nathan, and I remember him telling me one time, like, Jay, you're the only person I know who is actually doing what they went to college for. Like, and I was like, and even when you think about an English degree with the Africana Studies minor, and then I went on to be, the leader at the top level at Bossip. I was the senior content director, but I
mhm,
was at a senior level from the day I stepped in that door. I was a senior editor,
mhm,
but I worked for that publication for 15 years. And who
mm.
better to write about African American pop culture than someone who has a minor in Africana studies and a major in English? So, I can write and I also understand the context of our concerns,
Mhm,
everything from oppression, systematic oppression,
mhm,
racial discrimination, microaggressions, all of those things, and being able to put them into a language and do it intelligently, but also entertain and understand like we have a history of doing this as a people, that we have always understood how sometimes be subversive without
yes,
outwardly appearing so,
yes,
uh,
mhm. The yes,
even
ma'am, ma'am.
Exactly, exactly. So, I think that that job, it did really speak to my preparation.
Mhm.
And then as to, like, whether or not it helped me understand me moving around the country, not so much. A little bit, but not so I mean, we didn't really when we were talking about migrations, there was very little about Midwest outside of Detroit because
Mm.
Detroit and Chicago were big hubs for the
Mhm.
migration, not so much
Mhm.
Iowa.
Yeah.
So I don't
Iowa.
I still am, like, struggling a bit to
Yeah.
understand.
Well, I have a friend from Iowa, and I used to make fun I already told you that, but, I just met and then after that time, I know this is off subject, that we had lunch. I saw somebody with a plate from Iowa, and I was like, "Isn't that a trip?" We had lunch in an Iowa plate. I ain't never
And then
seen
the
it in
thing
my
is, like, now you'll see whenever you that's how everything goes. Anytime you become more conscious of something, then you start to see it everywhere.
Mhm. So you went from, your friend needed a writer, you went there, you went to did you go from there and then you went to Bossip, or how did that?
No, so I was freelance for a long time, like, it's interesting to be back. I'm in a freelance chapter now, but
Mhm,
at that point in time so, like, I would say probably I left New York August of 2005. By
mm,
October of 2005, I was writing full time
mm,
for, SOHH. What I wasn't technically a full-time employee. I was a 1099 employee, but which was it actually worked out for me because I picked up a column for SOHH called Player Watch that was extremely popular, where I would interview people behind the scenes in the industry. So I happened to do a story on the production trio, at the time they were a trio, Justice League. So they had produced a ton of stuff for Rick Ross and Jeezy, and this is like early 2000s. So Anselm Rock. At that time, he was Anselm Samuel. He was one of the editors at Double XL. So he had seen this story and he wanted coverage of them in Double XL and commissioned me to write something. And so I wrote something for him. And then he sent me another assignment. I think it was like maybe I did Feral Monch next. And
mhm,
then um, I got an assignment to cover it was like a thing where you would kinda look back and you would talk to artists about, like, older projects, so I talked to Exhibit, and then there was, like, a piece on 3 6 Mafia, and at the
mhm,
time, and the funny thing, this is, like, still, like, an internet era, like, it's not the
mhm.
internet that we know now, but, like,
Is the MySpace era? Was that MySpace era?
it was the MySpace era, and
Mhm,
like, similar to how now, like, when you're in kinda the same career, you know the other names and, like, you kind of follow them on Instagram or whatever,
mhm,
or maybe prior to Instagram, it was Twitter. Like, at
mhm,
that point in time, you would kinda become, like, MySpace friends, and you would connect to writers in
mhm,
that way. Excuse me. So I got this assignment to write about I forget which 3 6 Mafia album it was, but I spoke to I think every group member except for one, and I remember that got the attention of Daytwan Thomas, who was, like, one of the I think he might have been editor-in-chief at that time, because he was like, how did you reach these people? Because obviously if an artist has a publicist, it's easy enough. So I remember
mhm,
the publicist, Nancy Byron, she led me to one member or two members, maybe. I think the bigger names, Juicy J and DJ Paul. But
mhm,
I reached out to Play a Fly, who's like another Memphis rapper, and
mhm,
people who are from the South or from Memphis or Atlanta, they ones that know will know, and then
mhm,
the outsiders probably may not know Play a Fly. But
mhm.
he and I were MySpace friends, and it was as simple as, like, I sent
Hey.
him a message, and he connected me to, like, I think Gangsta Boo and, a few of the other ones,
Mhm,
Crunchy Black, and so that's how the piece came together. It was literally, like a lot of times in journalism, the editor will give you, like, "Here, hit up these people, here's their publicist," or they'll put you on email with their publicist. But I was
mhm,
doing, like, "Okay, you only could get me these 2. I wanna get every voice. I wanna understand, like, what was your perspective on this song?"
mhm,
That got me accolades because I was, like, kinda known for going above and beyond.
mhm,
And, so from Double XL okay, so the boyfriend I mentioned, he was in Atlanta, so he moved to LA, and that kinda changed things
mhm.
up for me too, because then I started meeting other people in LA, and I met Ryan Ford, who he now heads Cashmere Agency, which is one of Snoop Dogg's manager, Ted. Sung, he is his business partner, and so Ryan was super connected in the California area. So he knew a lot of the West Coast folks, and so he started having me signing me stuff for the Source magazine.
Mm.
And so now I have bylines and then double XL. Clover Hope had been a double XL and then she went to Vibe. So sometimes Clover would ask me, "Hey, can you write something?" And then also people knew me from living in Atlanta for that 1 year. So
Mhm.
I would get like, "Hey, BT Hip Hop Awards is in Atlanta. Can you do red carpet for us?" Vibe
Mm.
had me do it 1 year. I think there might have even been a Vibe Awards. I don't know if I'm remembering correctly, but there were different awards at that time. It wasn't
Mhm.
just BET related awards. So I would once I was in LA, I would still be getting calls to do work in Atlanta. And I was
Mhm.
like, my gut was kind of telling me I should go back to Atlanta because I was like, I know editors in California, I know editors in New York, and most of the Atlanta writers, probably outside of Maurice and Jacinta Howard, are
Mhm.
not writing for these same publications. So if I go to Atlanta, I'm going to be able to capitalize even more.
Mhm.
So I moved back to Atlanta in 2008, like July of 2008. And
Mhm.
from there, I was doing pretty good. I was, freelancing, still writing for SOHH, but freelancing for Double XL a lot.
Mhm.
And then a recession hit. And then that's kind of what led to me getting the job for Bossip because it was like, after I was struggling because the freelance SOHH had been my foundation, so I was getting, like, a regular salary.
Mhm.
The double XL checks were nice, but they had lowered the rate, and it was just too hard to pay the bills, and
Mhm.
I still was kind of floating around. I hadn't bought a house yet. I was staying with relatives, and then a friend of a friend, well, yeah, a friend of a friend ran Bossip, so
Mm.
I still, it wasn't totally nepotism. I still applied the regular way. I sent
Mhm.
her my resume and went in and did an interview. And Bossip has a really strict writing test. I believe to this day they still do it, at least up until when I left in February, where you would have to write these 75-word, like short, almost like a short story with a headline.
Mhm.
And Mar Fraser, who was the chief creative officer when I came in, she was like, "Your samples are the best like I've ever seen." And I remember probably the first year, I had my little
Mhm.
writing samples and I hung them like on the
Oh,
wall because I was so proud because I
yes.
had never taken a writing test, that kind of writing
Mhm.
test. Now, of course,
Yeah.
I had taken PSATs and SATs
Right.
and ACTs,
Right.
your standardized tests, but
Right.
yeah, I was super proud of it. People would still reach out for freelancing, and if it was
Mhm.
a good enough opportunity, I would do it, but yeah, and now I'm at the point when I was still at Bossip, the only places I really freelanced were Variety and Ebony, but
Mhm.
after last February when I was impacted, so the journalism industry has been really hit hard. Multiple things. People will point to the recession in the economy, but it's
Mhm.
also the industry. So a lot of the big, publishers are I'm sure people have seen I'm not sure, but people may have seen talk about Jay Penske. So Jay Penske owns, like, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, Billboard,
Mhm.
it's all Rolling Stone. It's all in, like, the same umbrella.
Mhm.
And then you
I
have,
didn't
like, your
realize that.
Rupert Murdochs where
Mhm.
they'll own, like, multiple, or the CBS or whatever, and, like, so you have
Mhm.
multiple outlets who are all owned by, like, maybe one, usually a white
Mm.
guy, and when that guy, like, he has certain things, we touch this, we don't, and it happens in Black media too.
Mhm.
Don't get me wrong, because I'll tell you straight up, when I was working with both Moguldom and with I1,
Mhm.
the leadership will say, like, "That's my friend, you're not gonna talk about them." So even when injustice is done, and this is what I mean about journalism.
Yeah.
This is why whatever you read, you still should read independent and support independent journalism, because at the end of the day, a lot of these other places are not gonna tell you the whole story if their friends are part of the problem or if they are part of the problem. And being
Or do you mean
unbiased
part of
is
the story? Are you saying part of the story or part of the problem? Or both?
both.
Okay.
Either. Either
Yes.
or. Sometimes it's just a story and sometimes it's a problem, you know?
Right. Right. I'm sorry for cutting you off.
It's okay.
It's getting interesting. So when you're saying the industry is changing, you're saying it's also too because there's so few people that own all of those outlets. Would you also say not only is it
It's
because of the
multiple
economy?
things. So, okay, so one is you have like monopolies, like what I'm describing are monopolies. So you
Mhm,
have, it's a one-sidedness. So even if people are wondering why things like the ICE detentions are underreported or like why it takes a few days to find out that a 5-year-old was taken from his driveway, it's because some of the bigger media companies might be under
mhm,
one of these publishers who have decided they don't want to make political allies angry, and I'll leave
gotcha.
it that big, political
Mhm,
allies. And
mhm,
so the independent publisher is the one who can tell you the stories that the other ones won't touch until everyone is kind of talking about them.
mhm,
But the other things that are affecting it are advertising. So everybody has costs. There's the overhead to pay. If you're not in a remote role, if you're working for a company that has an office, they've got to pay rent, they got to pay lights, they got to pay utilities.
mhm,
If they have full-time employees, they've got to pay for insurance, benefits, those
mhm,
type of things. Okay, so what happens when you were a print publication, you used to sell a certain amount of ads, and
mhm,
now you don't have the traffic to support the ads anymore. That's why you see the lessening of the print publications, all of these
mhm,
magazines that are now we're now digital. Everything is digital. It's because the audience has shifted to digital. There's less people reading paper, newspapers, paper. And then even with the digital, they're struggling now, especially because similar to how with music and you see the shifts from records sold to streams, it takes more like in the translation to the journalism world, the CPMs, it has to do with like the ads that you see in the videos and then
mhm,
also, like, there's a lot of KPIs, like, it might be time on site, so it's really hard keeping those eyes on site, especially because the users have gone from we had so many people who were newspaper lovers, magazine lovers, they wanted to have the magazines in their collection, they wanted to rip out the pages and put them on the walls, but
mhm,
now everybody is like this with a
mhm,
device.
mhm,
So, like, they're scrolling, they're getting their news from the shade room or whatever,
mhm,
social media,
mhm,
and so now the value of the website is like decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. So they have to lay off people because people are not reading the website anymore. So now you don't have the demand for the human. And then you also have an expert will come in and say, you can save money if you just use these AI generated um, videos because the ad rate is higher on videos than on
mhm,
like a website page.
mhm, mhm,
So now they're gonna take a shortcut, and instead of having an article that has been fact checked and written by a human being, they might have, you know, one person who's spread super thin, who doesn't have the time to do the fact checking, and then they take this one person and they feed all the articles into the AI
mhm.
and then the AI creates a video, and so the
Ah,
videos are kind of and then they might put the video it might be a reel on their social site or whatever it
mhm,
might be, but just that's really how the digital age is impacting journalism. So, there is definitely less jobs in this industry. There are
mhm,
still jobs, and there's still a need for it, and there's still
mhm,
prizes for great writing, and
mhm,
I absolutely do not discourage people from writing. If you are interested in a career in writing, absolutely pursue it.
mhm.
And I used to side eye, all those people. I mentioned it at the beginning, like the people who told me that I was going to be a starving artist,
Right.
only to for me to basically have a six-figure career
Mhm,
for at least a decade of my career, I was making over $100,000.
mm,
And now, um, it's much less opportunities that are like that. But
mhm,
you're also seeing a shift so that now editorial director type positions, which used to just be for magazines, or for journalism, now they have them for every company. So a company that makes jewelry has an editorial director.
Mm,
A company that makes clothing has an editorial director. A company that makes video games, because people have understood that there's still a value in communications. So I would just say really be open to different kinds of writing, and then that's even speaks to my original approach to your line of questioning, in that I'm
mhm,
a writer first. So,
mhm,
and I have to also shout out, I mentioned her, Samia Bashir, the poet who was one of the editors for the anthology that I work with.
mhm,
She told me a long time ago, writers write. Just that simple, like literally never to confine myself to, oh, I only do this kind of writing or that kind of writing. And I think that really goes for almost any industry. Whatever you're passionate about. If you're an artist, artists create art. Like
mhm,
don't just think I only do this kind of art or I only do that kind of art. Because
mhm,
sometimes the opportunity will be there, but
mhm.
it's just not in that place that you're looking for it. It might be somewhere else.
Would you say that journalism has changed in the sense of that it no longer, like you said, relies on writing, but it's a mix now of like the visual with the video? And could you say now that even though you're a writer, you still, when you're having conversations to do your writing, you have to have the conversations. Is that why you have moved or are building a podcast now? Because that is still part of writing
Yeah.
the
I think
conversations?
the podcast was a natural extension for me
Mhm,
because one of the things that did happen, as I said, I was with one outlet for 15 years. So it's really
mhm,
easy to get to reach a point where you're like, okay, how am I growing? And I think
mhm,
that's another thing for everyone to consider. Like, no matter what age you are, like, you don't stop growing. You don't want to
mhm,
stop growing. When you hear people who are unhappy with themselves, a lot of times it's because they have stopped finding ways to learn and grow. And
mhm,
so for me, I reached a point where I was, not to say I mastered my craft, but like I was like, okay, just writing at Bossip still enough for me? And I found like, okay, it's challenging for me to do these on camera interviews because I'm so worried about, what do I look like? Do I know what I'm talking about? Like, I don't
mhm,
know what questions to ask. And so in my last few years at Bossip, I was really challenged to step up my game in terms of becoming more of a multimedia journalist. I think I also, for a long time, I never wanted to be like a famous person. I wanted my name to be known for what I did, but
mhm,
I was kind of shy about showing my face just because I like the anonymity. I'm the kind of person where I'm outgoing, but like I like to have a friend who's more outgoing. So like
mhm,
they can kind of be, and my best friend is Angela Yee, so that's easy.
mhm,
So she's very well known, very bubbly and outgoing, and has a huge community of friends. But
mhm,
at a certain point, I realized like you don't have to be exactly like this. You can
mhm,
still be you, and
mhm,
you stop kind of um, hiding the parts of yourself that you're not, or like it's like exercising the muscles that aren't getting used. So
mhm,
I started learning how to do interviews really with my own personality and not being so stiff or so
mhm,
worried about like, oh my God, I don't want to keep asking, like I don't want to ask the same questions. Like ask the question that you're interested in. Ask the
right.
question that you want to know. Ask the
Mhm,
question, that it's going to get the person excited because
mhm,
they were doing this little small thing that maybe the vast majority of outlets have not noticed, but
mhm,
you just caught it, and you're going to get
mhm,
this unique story that no one else is going to get. And I think that
mhm,
only comes from talking to people. And I
mhm,
think for me, I saw podcasting as a new challenge, the same way that
mhm,
I saw on camera interviews as a new challenge. And that's
mm,
really why I decided to take that journey. It also is another one of those things where, like, people were telling me for years, I had people telling me, like, "You have a great voice, like, you should have a podcast." And the other part was just me being concerned of, like, "How do I do it? Where do I go?" Like, and it just so happened that a lot of times when you decide you wanna do something, the opportunity will show up. The doors will
mhm,
open, and that's really
mhm,
what happened with I made a connection with, Megan Taylor, she's a digital producer for the Steve Harvey Morning Show.
Mhm.
She and I were chit-chatting, and I had her cracking up, and we were with Lateris from Dear Future Wifey, and he said, "You guys should do a podcast." And I was like, "I'm down." And she was like, "I'm down." And at the time, she was working with the iHeart, and I was working with Radio One, and those are like they don't mix.
Mhm.
So I was kind of concerned, like, can I go record in iHeart without pissing off my boss? Well, once I
Mhm.
was laid off, it wasn't an issue anymore. I can go do things across the channel, So it
Mhm.
worked out. And then she ultimately, schedule wise, it didn't work. But I also from the start, I was really more passionate about the show. That's why, even when we first started, I was like, "Are you okay with me using my name?" And she was like, "Yeah, listen, I'm not." She's like, "I don't even have to be on camera." So that kind of allowed me to say, like, okay, if I'm going to show up as myself,
Mhm.
what does this show look like? What are we
Mhm.
talking about? What is
Mhm.
the theme? What is the logo? What is the name? What are the
Mhm.
segments? And I think that comes, some people find it really young, like you know who you are, you know what the story you're trying to tell. For
Mhm.
me, I think it's something that I've grown into, being confident about my purpose and what my story is and what I'm comfortable sharing. And
Mhm.
also like the way that life has challenged me, and how those challenges have actually only helped me to be like more me than ever. And really wanting to see other people find that same type of fulfillment,
Mhm.
because we're living in a time that can be really dark, and the joy can be hard to come by. And so I think, if anything, I was like, how would I help people? I'm speaking as someone who has suffered from anxiety, has suffered from depression, has dealt with like different kinds of abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, those type of things. And
Mhm.
it's easy to get stuck when you have had challenges or difficulties, but it's important to remember that challenges are not unique. Everyone has challenges. Now, some people are very privileged and blessed not
Mhm.
to have the same degree of challenge or the same type of challenge, but everyone faces challenges. Like the mental ones, to me, are the ones that are, I don't want to say they're easy to address, but I think it, just because I struggled with depression so young as a teenager and in my
Mhm.
20s, that I was able to find music helps me,
Yes.
exercising my craft helps me.
Yes.
And then even just learning, when I think this way,
Mhm.
more good stuff happens versus when I
Right.
think the other way, when
Mhm.
I think negative, like. And so I was like, that's actually what the show is. It's like, and I know there are other shows that focus on some of the same things, and I feel
Now,
very
what's your show?
fortunate.
What's the purpose of your show, and what is it called, so you could share it with folks so they
So
know
the
where to
show
find you?
Thank you. So the show is called Hey Janee, and it is on, and Janee is spelled Janee with the accent, just as you guys see it here in my lower third. But you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on YouTube. And it's on the Janeé Bolden YouTube page. And I also have an Instagram page, Hey Janee Podcast, as well as my regular Instagram, which is my name. But the podcast, is the way I describe it, is it's really me talking about navigating life as a creative mindfully. And so I usually have a guest. It's usually another creative, or it might be an entrepreneur. We might be talking about mental wellness. We might be talking about the craft, if they have a film coming out or an album, or if they have dealt with something that they want to share. So we talk
Mhm.
about everything from like grief,
Mhm.
depression, the challenges of being an independent filmmaker, the challenges of being a comedian, being an artist, of being, so many different things, writers, rappers, producers. I've had so many different great people. I had Michael Jai White as far as actors. I've had Layla Pruitt, who was on BMF. I had Algie Smith, who is a singer. I have a great episode coming up with a reggae artist named Kez Namdi. He is nominated for Best Reggae Album, Blood and Fire, which is an amazing album. I can't recommend enough. I've had so many great guests, and I think they come in, and a lot of times they have no idea what they're getting into, because publicists sometimes will schedule talent with a journalist. And I think even sometimes the publicists, I'm sure that they're not telling them just because they don't really necessarily know how to describe it.
Mhm.
But They trust me as a journalist, and I'm grateful because I do think showing up in as myself for so long, over the course of a 20-year career is what enables me to, like, get in front of anybody regardless of what I know and just say, like, genuinely, like, "What are the things you love? What are the things we have in common? What were the challenges that you faced, and how did you meet them? Like, how did you manage them? How did
Mhm,
you get through? Was it
mhm,
meditation? Was it, you know, get going outside? You know,
mhm.
how can you, tell your story so that other people can get where they're trying to go?" And it's really rewarding. I am 31 episodes in at this.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And when did you start it? 31
I
episodes, that's
started in
good.
May.
Wow.
So I was trying to do initially, weekly. So as I try to keep up weekly. I'm not sure if that counts as weekly. I don't know. I know it's 52 weeks in a year. We started in May and we're now in the 3rd week of January. There definitely have been weeks where I had the
Mhm.
same episode up for 2 weeks, but we were pretty consistent, and
Yes.
we have had to move around a little bit. Sometimes we record at the main studio, other times we're at the Atlanta Voice studio, but as much as possible when I have the opportunity to tell a story that I'm excited about, I'm going to find a way to record.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for, joining us and sharing your story so that people can learn about your journey and the possibility of becoming a writer and a journalist and helping others. So make sure to follow Janee on her podcast and follow her on Instagram. And then we'll see you on our next episode. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.